Okay, so picture this. You're like casually scrolling through RoleCatcher, right? Checking out different jobs, and then bam, you see it. Kosher Slaughterer. Talk about a job title you don't see every day. I mean, it's kind of like, whoa, is that still a thing in like 2024? It totally is. So whether you're one of those people prepping for a job interview and that job just happens to be that, or you're just, super curious like me, get ready to deep dive into a world I bet most of us never even think about.
What really gets me about this is how something that seems like such a niche job, you know what I mean?
Mm.
It's actually like a peek into how these old traditions are still a part of today's world.
For real. And RoleCatcher, that's our main source for today, they don't just do those like basic job postings. They're these crazy in-depth career guides, which is kind of how we ended up down this rabbit hole today.
And let me tell you, it's a rabbit hole worth going down. Because yeah, kosher slaughterer, it might sound a little, yeah, but the traditional word, shoshay, now that's got some weight to it. It makes you think about like a whole history of knowledge and religious practice, a really important role in the Jewish community.
Okay, so real quick, for anyone who might need a little refresher, what does kosher even mean? I feel like people throw that word around, but it's more than just like a priest sprinkling holy water on your food.
Exactly. Kosher is all about this whole set of Jewish dietary laws, really detailed stuff that covers everything about how you prepare food. And the slaughtering, that's a really big deal. That's where the shoshay comes in. They make sure that the meat follows all these ancient rules, super, super specific stuff that's been around for centuries.
So you're telling me like these rituals from like forever ago are still being done today. That's wild. The guide actually talks about how these aspiring shushays are studying like legit religious texts, the real deal, and at the same time they're learning to use all this modern meatpacking equipment. It's kind of mind-blowing.
It just goes to show you tradition finds a way, right? Even with all the technology and stuff. And speaking of technology, isn't it something how RoleCatcher is talking about applicant tracking systems and online profiles and all that for a job like this?
I know, right? It's like
Yeah.
these two totally different worlds just crashing into each other.
It's like the ultimate juxtaposition.
Totally. And I actually like that the guide's up front about it. Like, they're not pretending this ancient job doesn't have to deal with the modern job market.
And you know what? That might be the most interesting part of this whole thing. Figuring out how a job that seems like it's all about this one very specific thing actually needs a surprisingly big variety of skills.
Yeah. Okay, hold up. You have to break that down for me because when I hear kosher slaughterer, my brain kind of just stops there. Like, what other skills are we even talking about?
Well, first of all, think about what they're really doing, right? They're providing this service to a community, and those beliefs, they run deep. So that means you got to have some customer service skills, you're building trust, answering questions, teaching people about what you're doing, all part of the job description, right?
Oh, wow. I never even thought of it like that. So it's like you said before, this bridge between like thousands of years ago and people living their lives today.
Exactly. And it gets even like deeper than that.
Mm.
The guide also makes a big deal about how shoshays need to really know their stuff about like food production in general, not just the actual slaughtering part.
So it's not enough to just know how to do it. You have to understand like the whole journey of where this food came from.
You got it. And that's actually where this very specific job starts to tell us something about like what everyone cares about these days. It doesn't matter if you keep kosher or not. People want to know their food's ethical, the animals were treated right, that whole farm-to-table idea.
Which makes me think about like the ethics of all this, especially with all the specific rules involved. Because let's be real, the pros and cons section, they don't sugarcoat it. This is definitely not a job for everyone.
Yeah, you got to be able to handle it, that's for sure. The guide talks about how demanding it is, not just like physically, but emotionally too. You got to be tough, really precise with what you're doing and, well, emotionally strong. There's no way around it.
Right. It's not just about being okay with like the whole slaughtering thing. The guide also goes into all the regulations and certifications, which, I mean, makes sense when you're dealing with religious stuff and food safety.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And this is where things get really interesting because you've got the shashay's understanding of religious law and how that connects to like what people think is ethical treatment of animals today. RoleCatcher's FAQ section, they actually talk about this, how minimizing the animal suffering is like a top priority in kosher slaughter.
Oh, you know what? Now that you mentioned it, I was reading about this one technique. I can't remember what it's called, but basically they use it to make the cut super fast and clean so the animal feels as little pain as possible.
Oh, you're thinking of the chalaf.
Hmm.
It's this special knife they use. Got to be crazy sharp and like perfectly smooth, no nicks or anything. It's what a bunch of rules they have to follow, all about making the slaughter as humane as possible. And the shashay, it's their job to like check and double check that knife every single time.
Wow. Talk about attention to detail. So we're not just talking about some random job here.
Yeah.
This is serious stuff, spiritual, ethical, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. And just like, any skilled profession, there's a whole career ladder to climb.
Okay, so like break it down for me. What does that even look like? How do you go from like newbie to, I don't know, sachet master?
Okay, so imagine this. You start as this apprentice, right? You're basically spending years just watching and helping out these experienced shushays, learning all the ins and outs of the religious laws, the techniques, the whole process beginning to end.
It's like a throwback,
Mm-hmm.
like an old school apprenticeship, but for something, well, even older.
Exactly. And over time, as you get better and you learn more, you become a junior shushay. You're actually doing the slaughtering now, but like there's always someone more experienced there with you, keeping an eye on things.
Okay, so it's hands-on, but with like a safety net, which, I mean, in this line of work seems like a good thing.
Totally. This is where you're really honing your skills, not just like the physical stuff, but also how to make decisions under pressure, knowing you've got this huge responsibility. And then after years of this like total dedication, you reach the top, senior shoshay.
So what's it like being at the top of your game in this profession?
Think of them as like the guardians of this whole tradition. They've mastered the technical stuff. They know the religious laws inside and out, and they're the ones making sure everyone in their community is following the highest standards.
Man, that's a lot to live up to.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize, like, this isn't just about the actual, well, there's so much more to it. Tradition, community, huge responsibility.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And this is actually where I thought RoleCatcher's stuff on interview prep was really interesting. They don't just ask those generic interview questions like, tell me about your weaknesses. They give you these scenarios, the kind of stuff a shoshay would actually have to deal with on the job.
Ooh, okay. Give me an example. Like, what kind of curveballs are we talking about here?
Okay, so say you're a shoshay, right? And you're already in the middle of slaughtering, but then you notice like a tiny imperfection on your bleed. What do? You got to think fast, but you also got to balance that with knowing the rules and doing what's right.
Whoa. Yeah, they definitely don't cover that in your average job training. You got to be able to think on your feet, but also like really understand the ethics and the religious side of every decision you make. It's crazy how much we've learned just from this one job, right? Like, talk about a deep dive.
It really makes you think, like there's so much we can learn about like ourselves and the world if we just like scratch the surface a little, especially when it comes to jobs you might not get at first.
Totally. And for anyone listening who's actually like got a job interview coming up for this kosher slaughterer position, this goes way beyond just like your average interview prep.
No kidding. You've basically gotten a crash course in the whole thing. The history, the religious part, the ethics, even what it's like trying to get hired for this kind of job today.
Right. Like, be ready to talk about ancient Jewish law 1 minute, then explain how you make sure the animal doesn't suffer the next. And oh yeah, don't forget to show off your tech skills for those applicant tracking systems.
It's crazy, right? Like the old and the new, all mixed up together. Just goes to show you tradition can change with the times.
Totally. But even if you're just here because, it's instinct, like me, I hope this has been pretty eye-opening.
I think it's good to remember,
Cool.
like even though everything's so digital these days, kind of impersonal, there are still people doing things the way they've been done for like forever. And the skill it takes, the
Yeah.
ethics, it's kind of amazing, honestly.
Absolutely. Okay, but here's the thing that's really got me thinking. Remember how RoleCatcher kept bringing up AI and automation? We've seen how even a job like this, it's being touched by all that tech stuff, at least when it comes to getting hired.
It makes you wonder, right? Like, how's this job, something so old and based on like human judgment, how's it going to deal with all this automation in the future? I mean, you can't just program a robot to do all that, can you?
Exactly. So, like, will we see AI show shit someday? Or is there something about this job, something about the spiritual part, the ethics, the connection to the community that a machine could never replace?
Big questions, man. No easy answers. It's like that bigger conversation about like, where does technology fit into our lives? What can we automate? And what should we maybe leave to actual humans?
It's definitely something to think about. Well, that feels like a good place to wrap up this deep dive. What do you think? Anything else before we sign off?
Just that it's been fun, you know? Always interesting to, like, go down these rabbit holes and see what we find.
Tell me about it. Big thanks to RoleCatcher for, well, giving us this whole idea in the first place. Who knew job postings could be so thought-provoking? And to everyone listening, thanks for coming along on this journey with us. Until next time, keep asking those weird questions, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.